At my son and daughter-in-law's Christmas party, I noticed something that stung more than I expected. A small place card on the corner table with my name written in faint ink, tucked behind a stack of unused napkins, as if they hoped no one would see I was even invited. I paused, breathed in the cold air drifting in from the entrance, and simply walked inside. I just smiled and kept my posture steady. My coat was still a little dusty from helping that woman on the highway, and my hands carried faint marks of grease I hadn't been able to wash off completely. Still, I held my head high. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end, and comment the city you're watching from. I'd love to see how far this story travels. I had always believed family gatherings should feel warm, like when my late husband used to bring home a fresh pine wreath the first week of December. I would hang it by the window, and our son would help me set the dinner table with the same red candles year after year. I truly thought today might carry some piece of that feeling. So I tried my best. I'd chosen a soft burgundy sweater that matched the holiday colors, brushed my hair the way my husband used to like, and wrapped a few small gifts myself. I imagined laughter, music, maybe even a hug from my son the moment I walked in. Instead, I was met with the sharp clinking of champagne glasses and the distant look on my daughter-in-law's face when she finally noticed me. I had prepared everything with care. My dessert recipe, the little ornaments I'd made for the grandchildren, even the holiday card I'd written by hand. Yet as I set the gifts down near the overly decorated tree, no one looked my way. They were busy rearranging chairs, discussing which guests should sit up front, and I somehow always ended up standing just a little outside the circle. Still, I held on to the hope that this evening might turn around, that maybe the effort I'd put into coming, helping that stranded woman, arriving despite the delay, would mean something. I didn't know then that the real twist of the night was about to step through the door, and everything would shift in an instant. The music from the living room drifted toward me, soft jazz, the kind people play when they want everything to feel expensive. I stepped a little farther inside, keeping my hands folded so no one would see the grease stains I hadn't fully scrubbed off. No one greeted me. A few of my daughter-in-law's relatives glanced over, then quickly looked away, like I was someone who had walked into the wrong house. I pretended not to notice. I moved toward the side table where the appetizers were arranged, all neat rows and tiny labels. Someone shifted the bowls deliberately, creating just enough space that I wouldn't comfortably reach anything. I stood there a moment, listening to the sharp laughter behind me. It was the kind of laughter that wasn't directed at me, but made me feel excluded anyway. The room felt colder than the December night outside. A group near the fireplace whispered and glanced in my direction. One of them murmured something, then covered her smile behind a champagne flute. My daughter-in-law, Alexis, brushed past me without making eye contact, adjusting her bracelet as if the only thing she could see was her own reflection in the ornaments. I took a slow breath and walked toward the Christmas tree, letting my fingertips graze one of the glass baubles hanging near the bottom. I had bought a pack of those same ornaments years ago, back when my husband was still alive and we decorated everything together. Tonight, they looked different, brighter, colder, like they belonged to someone else's holiday. "Are you waiting for someone to help you find a seat?" one of Alexis's cousins asked. Her voice was sweet, but the tone underneath wasn't. She gestured toward the back row of folding chairs, the kind people bring out when they run out of the good ones. I smiled. "I'll be fine." She shrugged and walked away. For a moment, I wondered if I was imagining it all. Maybe I was being sensitive. Maybe they weren't intentionally keeping me at arm's length. But then I caught a sentence floating through the air as two guests passed by. "She showed up like that? To this party?" I gently smoothed the sleeve of my sweater and kept my eyes forward. Still, in the middle of all the noise, I realized something quieter. My son hadn't come over to greet me. He was across the room, standing with Alexis and her parents. He looked polished, confident, like he belonged in their world. When he finally glanced my way, it was only for a second, quick, uneasy, like he didn't want anyone to notice the connection between us. That hurt more than anything anyone else had done. I shifted my weight, pretending to adjust the strap of my purse so I wouldn't look like I cared. A server carrying a silver tray paused near the group by the fireplace, offering drinks. When he reached me, he hesitated and said, these are for guests already seated." I nodded as if it didn't bother me. "No problem." He walked away without meeting my eyes. A small ripple of embarrassment rose in my chest, but I swallowed it. This was my son's holiday gathering. I wasn't going to cause a scene. I wasn't going to give anyone the satisfaction of seeing me upset. I just needed to stay composed until things calmed down. But the more I observed, the more the pieces clicked together. Alexis's mother kept giving me tight smiles that didn't touch her eyes. Guests whispered every time I crossed the room. People shifted their bodies slightly whenever I moved closer, like I was bringing the cold draft in with me. A realization settled in slowly, like snow collecting on a windowsill. This wasn't an accident. This wasn't a misunderstanding. They wanted me to feel out of place. And as the laughter grew louder and the light shimmered across the crystal glasses, I understood something else. Something heavier, sharper. I wasn't being ignored. I was being removed, piece by piece, from the picture they wanted to create. And my son wasn't stopping them. A few minutes later, the moment I'd been avoiding drifted toward me like a slow, heavy tide. An exchange I wasn't supposed to hear, but of course I did. I was standing near the hallway table, adjusting the ribbon on one of the gifts I'd brought, when Alexis's voice floated through the doorway. "She really came like that? Mom, I told you she doesn't match the vibe of this party." Her mother whispered back, but not quietly enough. "Just keep her away from the main photos? We don't want distractions." I didn't move. I didn't gasp. I simply placed the gift down, making sure the tag was straight. The ribbon shook only once when my hand betrayed me. A part of me wished I could walk out right then, but a deeper part stayed, trying to believe that maybe, just maybe, things would improve. That someone would step in and remind them I wasn't an outsider. That my son would at least try. I lifted my chin, smoothing the front of my sweater as I walked toward the living room again. The light from the chandelier reflected on the polished floors, making the space look warmer than it felt. A couple I didn't know passed by me, their conversations slicing through the air. "She's the one who didn't bring anything fancy," the woman murmured. "Alexis said she's sentimental," the man replied, as if it were a flaw. I stood still until they were gone. Then came the moment that removed all doubt. At the refreshment table, my daughter-in-law's uncle was pouring himself cider when Alexis approached him. She didn't know I'd walked up behind them. "She tries, I guess," she said lightly. "But it's embarrassing. My family builds companies. Hers? Well, you can tell." Her uncle chuckled. "Don't worry. We know how to handle guests like that." I felt a coldness that had nothing to do with winter. Handle guests like that. Not family. Not my husband's mother. Just that. I backed up a step, letting the noise swallow me. The conversations blended into a blurry hum, but underneath it all was the unmistakable truth. They were doing this intentionally. Every whisper, every glance, every little shift in the room was a choice. A choreography designed to push me out of the center and into the shadows. And then, as if the universe wanted to confirm it once more, my son approached. For a brief, hopeful second, I thought he might ask how I was, or at least acknowledge the effort it took for me to come after helping that stranded woman. But he only said, "Mom, can you stand over by the side for a bit? We're taking photos." I blinked. "Of course." He didn't look at me again. They gathered near the tree, smiling, laughing, adjusting jackets and dresses. Alexis's mother positioned everyone perfectly, tall in the back, couples in the front, children sitting on a velvet cushion. Someone joked about making sure this year's photos looked polished. I waited. I kept waiting. After the third shot, I realized no one was planning to motion me in. My son didn't even turn around. I watched from a distance as the camera flashed, capturing the version of their family they wanted the world to see. Clean, curated, complete. Without me. I wrapped my arms around myself and inhaled slowly, letting the scent of cinnamon and pine settle deep in my lungs. I reminded my heart to stay steady. I reminded my eyes not to soften. Because if I crumbled now, they would win. They would get exactly what they wanted. But the truth pressed in like a weight. This wasn't just neglect. It was deliberate, calculated. and I had finally seen it clearly enough that I couldn't pretend anymore. In that moment, something inside me, quiet, old, and steady, shifted. The kind of shift that doesn't make a sound but changes everything. I stood near the edge of the room, letting the hum of conversations fade into something distant. The Christmas lights blinked slowly, casting warm colors across faces that had never felt colder to me. And as I watched them pose for another photo, my son's arm around Alexis's waist, her parents standing tall beside them, my mind drifted somewhere else entirely. Somewhere safer. Somewhere before all this. I remembered the first Christmas after my husband and I bought our tiny starter home. The carpet was outdated, the heater rattled whenever it turned on, and the kitchen tiles always felt a little slanted. But we were happy. We strung popcorn garlands together while our son toddled around with a plastic ornament he refused to let go of. I can still hear my husband laughing when the lights flickered and the entire tree leaned a little too far left. "It's got character," he said, wrapping his arms around me and tightening the last branch. That memory used to warm me. Tonight, it hurt. Back then, family wasn't something complicated. We didn't have money, but we had each other. I never imagined a future where my son would stand in a room full of people who barely tolerated me, pretending not to see that I was alone. I held onto the edge of a side table for a moment, steadying myself as another memory surfaced. This one from the year my husband passed. The first Christmas without him. I had baked his favorite pecan cookies, even though no one asked for them. My son and Alexis arrived late that year too, but at least they hugged me then. At least they pretended to care. This year, they didn't even bother with that. I blinked, returning to the present, and watched as Alexis's mother adjusted the ornaments on the tree. Ornaments I had once gifted them when they moved into their new house. She handled them like fragile glass, but not with gratitude. More like she was arranging props in a display she didn't want me to touch. A tiny crack formed in my chest. I tried to shake it off. Maybe they just wanted a certain aesthetic. Maybe they were overwhelmed with guests. Maybe. But excuses can only cushion reality for so long, because then I remembered something sharper. A smaller moment that should have warned me long before tonight. Last spring, Alexis hosted a family brunch. I showed up with homemade blueberry muffins. She picked up the basket and said, "Oh, thanks," before setting it behind a vase of flowers, completely out of sight. Later that day, I overheard her tell a friend, "She means well, but I wish she'd just bring gift cards instead." Little moments, quiet insults, the kind designed to hide in plain sight. And now here I was, in their home again, surrounded by all the signs I should have paid attention to earlier. The distance, the dismissal, the subtle efforts to keep me at the edge of their world. As I stood there, watching them adjust their smiles for another photo, I felt a truth settle inside me, heavy, undeniable. They didn't want my presence. Only my silence. Only my distance. Only the version of me that didn't ask for anything and didn't inconvenience their curated lives. I ran my fingers over the pendant on my necklace, my husband's last gift to me. For a moment, I pretended he was here, standing beside me, reminding me that I still belonged somewhere. That my worth wasn't measured by how well I fit into their perfect pictures. The memory of his steady hands, warm and sure, held me together just long enough to breathe without breaking. But even as I steadied myself, I knew something had shifted permanently. This wasn't just a bad evening. This wasn't just an awkward party. This was the moment I finally admitted the truth. I had been slowly pushed out of my own family, and today was simply the first time I couldn't hide it anymore. I slipped away from the main room for a moment, pretending to admire the decorations along the hallway. Really? I just needed space to breathe. The noise behind me softened into a low murmur, laughter, clinking glasses, the occasional sharp whisper sliding through like a blade. The house was warm, but somehow my fingertips felt cold. Near a small console table, I noticed a stack of envelopes. Holiday cards, most likely. One of them had my handwriting on it. I had dropped it off earlier that week, thinking it might be a nice gesture. It was unopened. Every other envelope around it had been sliced open neatly. Mine sat untouched, slightly bent, like someone had brushed it aside without thinking. I reached out, but didn't pick it up. I didn't want to give myself away. Footsteps echoed from behind, and I saw my son's little girl, The only soft spot left in that house, run into the hall, clutching a stuffed reindeer. When she saw me, her face lit up. "Grandma, look," she said, showing me the sparkly antlers. My heart steadied for a moment. I bent down, smoothing her hair gently, but seconds later, Alexis's sharp voice cut through the moment. "Sweetie, come here. Don't bother Grandma right now. She's busy. Busy standing alone. Busy trying not to disappear." The child hesitated, looking between us, then obeyed her mother. I stood slowly, pressing my palm against my chest, grounding myself. I walked back toward the living room because standing in the hallway felt too much like hiding. When I re-entered, the guests were gathered around the dining table, discussing the seating arrangement for dinner. Alexis pointed to a small side table near the window. A table set for one. My table. It wasn't even close to the main group. No centerpiece, no place card, just a lone chair angled slightly away. I approached quietly, running my hand along the empty tablecloth. "Is this where I'm sitting?" I asked softly. Alexis didn't look at me when she answered. "It's just better for spacing. The big table is already full," her mother added. "We didn't expect last-minute surprises." A few people exchanged looks, the kind meant to be discreet but never truly are. I nodded once. "I understand," and I did. I understood perfectly. I took the seat anyway. The cushion was stiff, colder than the others. From this angle, I couldn't see the fireplace or the tree, just the back of everyone's heads as they settled into their places without me. A server placed a glass of water in front of me, then hurried back to the center table where the real guests were gathered. Their laughter rose again, bubbling like a celebration I had never been invited to in the first place. I sat with my hands folded, resting gently on the tablecloth, and let the reality of it settle. The whispers earlier, the photos without me, the unopened card, the little table tucked away. Piece by piece, they had arranged this evening exactly how they wanted, me on the outside, them in the center. And for the first time all night, I didn't try to fight the truth. I just let it sit beside me, quiet and undeniable, in that lonely chair by the window. Dinner hadn't been served yet, but the room had already split itself into two worlds. Theirs, warm and bright around the main table, and mine, quiet and dim near the window. I kept my posture straight, watching the reflection of the chandelier in my water glass. If I focused on that instead of the people, I could almost pretend I wasn't being pushed aside. Almost. A few guests walked past my little table on their way to the restroom. Each one gave me the same polite smile people use around strangers. One of them even said, "Enjoying the party?" as if I weren't family at all. I nodded, keeping my voice steady. "Yes, thank you." He didn't wait for a reply. The space around me felt colder the longer I sat there. The window beside me showed a thin layer of frost forming on the outside, little patterns creeping slowly toward the corner. I pressed my fingertips together, grounding myself in the quiet. Across the room, I caught the sound of Alexis laughing, loud enough to draw every eye. She was telling a story, something about her job, waving her hands dramatically. My son stood next to her, smiling the way he used to smile at home when he was young. Only now, it wasn't for me. He didn't even glance in my direction. As they talked, Alexis's father looked at the empty seat next to him and said to my son, "We should have invited someone to fill that spot. It looks lopsided." My son replied lightly, "It's fine. It's just Mom's seat. Just Mom's seat." A placeholder, an afterthought, a gap no one felt obligated to fill. I looked down at my lap for a moment, letting the sting pass through me instead of clinging to it. I'd learned that with age, pain travels faster if you don't hold on to it. A server placed a small bread basket on the main table. Another server followed with salad bowls. No one brought anything to my side table. I waited silently, not wanting to call attention to myself. After a while, I stood up slowly and walked over to the serving area. The servers were busy refilling drinks, their trays clattering softly. "Excuse me," I said gently. "Could I have a plate when you have a moment?" One of them blinked, surprised. "Oh, sorry, I didn't realize you were part of the dinner group." I smiled politely. "It's all right." He hurried off to grab a plate, flustered. By the time I returned to my table, the first toast had already begun. Alexis's father lifted his glass, thanking everyone for coming, praising his daughter for organizing the evening, and complimenting the beautiful unity of both families. I listened from afar, my untouched plate cooling beside me. Beautiful unity. The irony settled heavily in the room, though no one but me felt it. As the toast echoed through the house, I caught a glimpse of my reflection in the window, small, alone, but upright. There was a kind of strength in that posture, a quiet endurance I hadn't realized I was still capable of. For a moment, I wondered if anyone else saw it, but no one turned. Not my son, not Alexis, not a single person in that room. They weren't expecting me to react, and so I didn't. I simply folded my napkin across my lap, inhaled slowly, and let my silence speak in ways their noise never could. Because deep down, beneath the ache, something was beginning to shift, soft but certain. A line was being drawn, not by them, by me. Dinner finally began, though no one announced it to me. I realized only when I heard forks scraping softly against plates and saw the main table leaning forward in unison, reaching for dishes I was never offered. My server from earlier noticed my empty table and hurried over with a small plate of turkey and vegetables, much smaller than the portions everyone else had. He whispered an apology before rushing away again. I didn't blame him. None of this was his fault. I cut a small piece of turkey, chewing slowly, focusing on the act of eating instead of the sounds of chatter floating from across the room. They were deep into a conversation about a family trip they were planning together, one I had clearly not been included in. Alexis's mother described matching ski outfits. Her father discussed booking a lodge. Someone asked my son who would watch the kids. "We'll figure it out," he said casually. "Mom's usually busy." Busy. Busy sitting alone in a quiet house. Busy being forgotten until they needed something. I placed my fork down, letting the weight of that single word settle in my chest. A slow ache spread through me, but along with it, a clarity I hadn't expected. This wasn't accidental. It wasn't a misunderstanding. It was a pattern. One I had been trying to excuse for far too long. A group at the main table burst into laughter again. I didn't even bother trying to understand what the joke was. Instead, I watched their faces, bright, animated, full of ease, and I wondered when my presence stopped being part of their joy. I was wiping my hands on my napkin when one more detail confirmed everything I'd been feeling. Alexis leaned toward her mother, whispering something I couldn't hear. Her mother nodded and stood up, walking over to a group near the bar. Moments later, one of the men glanced directly at me, smirked, and shook his head as if agreeing with whatever they'd been told. The message traveled through the room faster than words could. I wasn't welcome. Not truly. Not even in the smallest way. My son didn't notice. Or maybe he did, and chose not to. The turkey on my plate had grown cold. I pushed it aside gently. Then came the moment that shifted the room again. Not because it was loud or dramatic, but because it was unmistakably intentional. A woman I recognized only vaguely, one of Alexis's distant relatives, walked up to my son and wrapped her hand around his arm. "Your mom seems a little out of place," she said softly, in a tone dripping with polite malice. My son exhaled slowly, rubbing the back of his neck. "Yeah, she's adjusting." Adjusting, as if loneliness was a phase, as if exclusion was something I had chosen. I straightened in my chair, folding my napkin with careful precision. Something inside me cooled, not sadness, not anger, but resolve. They thought I would just accept it. They thought I would shrink until I disappeared. They thought my silence meant weakness. But they had forgotten something important. I had lived long enough to survive things far worse than a cold Christmas table, and I wasn't done yet. Not with this night. Not with this story. The doorbell rang. It was a small sound, almost timid, but it cut through the room like a sudden shift in pressure. Conversations softened. Forks paused midair. Even the children went quiet for a moment, turning their heads toward the foyer. Alexis glanced at her mother, confused. "Did you invite anyone else?" Her mother shook her head. "Everyone on our list is already here." I stayed seated at my little table by the window, watching the moment unfold without moving. Something in the air changed. Not dramatic, not loud, just different. A kind of hush that made people stand a little straighter. My son walked toward the foyer, smoothing the front of his shirt as he opened the door, and there she was, the woman from the highway. Her hair was pulled back neatly now, her coat buttoned, her boots clean, but I recognized her instantly, The same woman whose car I had knelt beside in the freezing wind, whose hands I had held steady as she tried not to panic, whose gratitude had been so sincere it warmed me long after I drove away. She stepped inside, brushing snow from her shoulders. Her eyes scanned the room and then locked onto mine. "You," she said, her voice full of relief. "I was hoping you'd be here." Every head in the room turned toward me. I didn't move, not yet. My son blinked, confused. "You know my mom?" The woman gave him a look that could have melted ice. "Your mother is the reason I made it here safely tonight. She helped me on the shoulder of Highway 14 when no one else stopped." A ripple moved through the guests, surprise, curiosity, discomfort. Alexis's expression tightened. "Oh, that was you?" she said to me, forcing a small laugh. "We, didn't know why you were late." The woman turned to her sharply. "She helped me for nearly an hour in the cold. She ruined her sweater trying to fix my tire. I begged her to let me repay her, and she refused." Silence spread across the room like a slow wave. My son swallowed hard. "Mom, why didn't you say anything?" I folded my hands gently. "It wasn't important." But the woman stepped forward, refusing to let my quietness hide anything. "No," she said, louder this time. "It is important, especially considering the way she was treated the moment she walked in." Alexis stiffened. Her mother blinked rapidly, her lips pressing together in a thin, nervous line. A few guests exchanged uneasy looks. The woman glanced at the little solitary table where I had been seated all night. Her eyes darkened. "Is that where she's supposed to sit?" No one answered. She shook her head slowly. Unbelievable. Then she reached into her bag and pulled out a small envelope. "Before I forget, I came to deliver this personally." She handed it to my son and added, "Consider it a generous gift from our company, one that exists only because your mother showed kindness when she didn't have to." Another wave of whispers. A few gasps. Alexis tried to smile, tried to recalibrate the entire social dynamic in real time, but the woman wasn't finished. She walked straight to me, placing a gentle hand on my shoulder. "I'm glad you're here," she said softly. "People like you deserve to be at the center, not the edges." A warmth spread through my chest, quiet but strong. For the first time that night, the room wasn't looking past me. They were looking at me, and some of them finally understood exactly what they had done. The room shifted with a kind of uneasy stiffness, the way people stand when they're suddenly aware of their own behavior. Conversations didn't just quiet, they evaporated. Every gaze moved between the woman from the highway and me, as if they were trying to piece together how the person they dismissed all evening had become the center of someone else's gratitude. My son held the envelope she'd given him, turning it over slowly. His eyes flicked toward me, searching for something, an explanation maybe, or forgiveness. I didn't look away, but I didn't offer anything either. Not yet. Alexis, flustered, stepped forward with a forced laugh. "Well, this is unexpected. Thank you for coming, but we were actually just about to." The woman didn't let her finish. "Before dinner?" she asked calmly, glancing at the main table. "Because it looks like dinner started without her." A wave of discomfort swept across Alexis's family. Her mother shifted in her seat. Someone cleared their throat. My son ran a hand through his hair, the way he used to do as a boy when he realized he'd done something wrong. "I'm sure it wasn't intentional," Alexis said quickly. "Things just got busy." The woman raised an eyebrow. "Busy enough to seat her alone?" My son opened his mouth, then closed it again. No one defended the decision. No one dared. The woman stepped beside my chair, her presence steady like a shield I never asked for, but suddenly deeply appreciated. "She saved me tonight," she said to the room. On a dark highway, in the cold, with cars speeding past, she didn't hesitate. She didn't leave me. She paused. "But all of you did, the moment she walked into this house." The silence that followed was heavier than anything I had felt all night. Alexis's father finally broke it. "We didn't know," he muttered weakly. "You didn't ask," the woman replied. Someone near the bar whispered, "This is awkward." Another shushed them. My son's shoulders sagged slightly. "Mom," he said quietly, "why didn't you tell us?" I kept my voice gentle. I wasn't trying to be noticed. It landed harder than I expected. Even Alexis blinked. The woman looked at my little table again, a single plate, a single chair, a lonely glass of water. She turned to my son. "Is this really how you treat her?" He couldn't answer. His face flushed with a guilt he couldn't hide. Alexis stepped in, trying to regain control. We didn't mean anything by it, she insisted. It was just the layout. The layout? The woman's voice carried a quiet bite. You put her by a window like she was part of the scenery. A few guests winced. My son finally exhaled, long and slow. We messed up, he admitted. His voice trembled just enough that I knew he meant it. I messed up. The woman nodded once, but didn't soften. Fix it. Her instruction wasn't loud, but it was powerful enough to ripple through the entire room. Guests shifted, chairs scraped softly as the main table rearranged itself. My son moved quickly this time, pulling out a seat near him, clearing space, removing an extra centerpiece to make room just for me. People watched with a mix of embarrassment and realization. Some avoided my eyes, others looked at me with something like regret. But I didn't move yet. Not because I refused to sit with them, but because I wanted to see, just for a moment, whether this change was genuine or a performance. My son stepped toward me, voice low. Mom, please, sit with us. There it was. Not an order, not an obligation, a request. The first real one of the night. I looked at the woman from the highway. She gave me a soft nod, as if reminding me I didn't owe anyone an answer except myself. Slowly, I stood, resting one hand on the table as I rose. The room watched. The dynamic had shifted, and for the first time all evening, I wasn't the one shrinking. They were. I walked toward the main table slowly, not out of hesitation, but because I wanted every step to settle. The room had gone from lively to tense, like everyone was holding their breath. My son pulled the chair out farther, making sure there was plenty of space, his earlier confidence replaced with something softer. Remorse, maybe. I didn't rush to fill the silence. When I finally reached the table, I rested my hand on the back of the chair but didn't sit just yet. People shifted, pretending not to stare, but their attention clung to me like static. Alexis clasped her hands too tightly, her knuckles pale. Her parents looked everywhere but at me. My son swallowed. Mom, we want you here. The word want landed differently this time. Not as pity, not as obligation. It was the kind of word someone uses when they finally understand the weight of what they took for granted. I let the moment hang for a breath before I lowered myself into the chair. The cushion was warm. Someone had been sitting there minutes earlier. And the space around me widened as the table adjusted to include me. The woman from the highway watched with quiet approval before finding a seat nearby. The server hurried over and replaced my cold plate with a fresh one. He poured me a drink with careful hands, mumbling an apology. I gave him a small nod. It wasn't his fault. It never had been. As I unfolded the napkin, the shift in the room settled into something palpable, almost visible. Conversations restarted in cautious trickles, but none of them quite regained their earlier ease. A few guests offered me nods, awkward smiles, the kind people give when they're trying to rewrite history on the spot. Alexis tried first. We should have asked if something happened on your way here, she said, forcing a polite tone. I met her eyes, steady and calm. It wouldn't have changed much. Her jaw tensed. She knew I was right. Her father cleared his throat. We, didn't realize you helped someone tonight. That was generous of you. I didn't respond, not out of cruelty, but because some realizations don't deserve to be cushioned. The woman from the highway glanced at me, then at them, her expression making it clear she saw through the sudden shift in empathy. My son leaned forward. Mom, I'm sorry. Truly. His voice cracked just enough that the room took notice. For a moment, I saw the little boy he once was, the one who clung to my hand in crowded rooms, who never let go until he felt safe. I softened just slightly, not enough for anyone to mistake it as forgiveness, but enough for him to feel I'd heard him. Before I could answer, Alexis's mother, who had been silent until now, spoke up. We should have treated you better, she admitted quietly. Her posture stiffened as she added, Tonight could have gone differently. The woman from the highway tilted her head. It still can. Her words were simple, but they shifted the room again. Not in a dramatic way, just enough to remind everyone that respect wasn't something you showed when it was convenient. I lifted my glass, not in a toast, but as a gesture of composure. The chandelier lights reflected in the liquid, shimmering in a way that felt grounding. I didn't come here for attention, I said softly. I just wanted to spend Christmas with my family. My son closed his eyes for a moment, the truth hitting harder than any accusation. The table fell completely silent, and in that silence, everyone understood. I wasn't demanding a place. I had always had one. They were the ones who forgot. The table stayed still for a long moment, like everyone was afraid to breathe too loudly. I could feel the weight of their eyes, not heavy with judgment this time, but with something closer to reckoning. The woman from the highway took a quiet sip of her drink, giving the room a chance to catch up to its own conscience. My son's voice finally broke the silence. "Mom, I'm really sorry. I should have been there when you walked in. I should have..." He stopped himself, shaking his head. "I should have treated you better. Not just tonight." He didn't say the rest, but he didn't have to. I heard it in the way his shoulders sagged, in the way he couldn't meet my eyes for a moment. I let him sit in that truth, not to punish him, but because rushing in to comfort him would have let the lesson slip through his fingers. Alexis shifted in her seat. "We didn't mean to hurt you." Her voice was softer now, less polished, but she still couldn't hide the tightness in her jaw. "We had a lot going on." I kept my expression calm. Everyone has a lot going on. The woman from the highway smiled faintly at that. Someone near the end of the table murmured, "She's right," and the whisper rippled through the room, tightening a few throats. For the first time that evening, I didn't feel the need to shrink. I was seated at the same table, yes, but it wasn't the seat that mattered. It was the shift, the quiet reclaiming of space that was mine long before tonight. My son cleared his throat. "Mom, can I get you anything? Another drink? More food?" I shook my head gently. "No, thank you, I'm fine." The simplicity of it made him flinch. A son should know when his mother isn't fine. A son should notice. Across the table, Alexis's mother finally spoke again, quieter than before. "We misjudged you," she admitted. "It won't happen again." Her husband nodded stiffly, embarrassed enough that he kept looking at the tablecloth instead of at me. I didn't need an apology from either of them. Their discomfort was enough proof that the truth had reached them. The woman beside me leaned back, crossing her legs with the kind of confidence that didn't need volume. "Funny how kindness works," she said casually. "You never know who people really are until you see how they treat the quietest person in the room." A few guests looked down, their faces warming with shame. Alexis exhaled. "We should have welcomed you properly," she said. "It won't happen again." The words floated across the table, neat and tidy, but they didn't carry the weight of true understanding. Still, I nodded once. Not in agreement, but in acknowledgement. I had spent years thinking that silence kept the peace, that if I stayed small, no one would be bothered. Tonight, I realized something else entirely. Silence doesn't keep the peace. It keeps the hierarchy. And I was done sitting at the bottom of it. The servers came around to clear plates, and people shifted into polite conversation again, though the ease was gone. They were careful now, watching their words, glancing at me as if measuring the distance between who they had been and who they wanted to appear to be. I didn't say much. I didn't need to. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is simply stop letting people step over you, as if that's where you belong. When dessert was served, the house felt different. Not warmer, not kinder, just quieter. People moved with a cautious awareness, as if afraid to bump into the truth they'd spent the evening avoiding. My son stayed close, hovering in a way he hadn't done in years. Every now and then, he'd glance at me like he was checking that I was still there. Not physically, but emotionally. I didn't give him an easy answer. Some moments are meant to sit heavy. The woman from the highway eventually stood, smoothing her coat as she prepared to leave. She placed a gentle hand on my shoulder. "If everyone treated others the way you treated me," she said, "holidays would feel a lot different." Her smile was kind, sincere. "Take care of yourself." "You too," I told her, and I meant it. When she stepped out into the cold night, the entire atmosphere shifted again. Without her presence, the room was left to face its own reflection. People started gathering their things, offering awkward goodbyes. No one met my eyes for long. They weren't ready to confront the version of themselves they had been earlier. Eventually, it was just family left, or the pieces of one. My son approached first. He didn't rush his words this time. "Mom, I know tonight doesn't make up for anything," he said quietly, "but I want to do better. I want you, in our lives, really in it." His voice trembled on the last part. I studied his face, a face I helped shape, A face that once ran home to me after every scraped knee, every playground fight, every disappointment. Somewhere along the way, adulthood had pushed me out of his orbit. Or maybe he'd let someone else do it for him. But standing there, he looked like the boy I raised, trying to find his way back. I placed my hand briefly over his. The door has never been closed. I paused. But it isn't unlocked for just anyone. He nodded, understanding more in that one sentence than he had in years. Alexis lingered behind him, unsure if she should speak. Her posture wasn't defensive this time, just uncertain. "I'm sorry," she said. The words were thin, but honest enough not to reject. We didn't see things clearly. I met her gaze. Most people don't until they're made to. She lowered her eyes, accepting it without argument. Coats were gathered, lights dimmed, and good nights exchanged with a gentleness that felt unfamiliar. When the front door finally closed behind the last guest, the house fell into a soft, echoing stillness. I stood there for a moment beside the dimming Christmas tree, its lights flickering softly against the ornaments I once gave them. My son hugged me before he left. Really hugged me, not the quick, distracted kind he'd grown used to giving. "Drive safe," I whispered, smoothing the back of his coat the way I used to when he was little. When the house emptied, I stepped outside into the cold night air. Snow had begun to fall, slow, steady flakes drifting down like tiny white reminders that even the heaviest days eventually quiet. I looked up at the sky, letting a few flakes melt on my cheeks. The street was silent. My car waited at the curb, still carrying faint smudges from helping a stranger who became the unexpected turning point of the night. I opened the door, pausing as I glanced back at the warm glow spilling from the windows behind me. I hadn't raised my voice. I hadn't begged for a place. I hadn't demanded respect. I had simply stood my ground. And somehow that was enough to change the entire room. As I slid into the driver's seat, I turned on the engine and whispered to myself, a small truth I'd earned the right to say, being seen isn't about where you sit. It's about who you are when the lights are brightest. And finally, the night didn't feel cold anymore.